My name is Rick Trachok. I'm the chair of the Board of Bar Examiners. And with me is Professor Howarth, and she's also a member of the Board of Bar Examiners. And what I'd like to do today, and with Joan's assistance, is give you an overview of the bar exam that will be offered remotely in February. And then how we're going to grade it, the regrade process. And then I have a list of a number of questions regarding the mechanics of the exam that I will go through. And so Sydney, what I'll do is I'll go through those after I explain the exam, how it's graded, the regrade process. But before I do that, everybody should have received a notice to sign the computer form, a reminder today. You've received one or two of these in the past, but you must sign up and fill out that form by end of business today, if you're going to be taking the exam in February. The other note that everybody has to be aware of is ILG, the testing service, will require you to register your computer, and their notice will go to everybody who has signed up and complied with the certification that I just mentioned a second ago on January 18th. And you have to have your computers registered with ILG no later than February 18th. I would suggest you do that earlier rather than later in case there's some problem with connecting your computer. So that being said, let me explain the process for the exam. Just as we did in February of 2020, in July of 2020 and February of 2021, the exam will be offered remotely. There will be no MBE component of the exam. There will be 7 essay questions, one of which will be pursuant to the Supreme Court rules, will be the professional responsibility essay question. And we'll have 2 Nevada practice test problems. The 2 problems will give you a simulation of a real life project. It'll be instructions from either the division head, the judge, the managing partner, or whatever, asking you to perform a task. And the included with each of these practice test problems will be the library. The library will include Nevada statutes on point and Nevada cases on point. And you will be required to perform those tasks, whether it's to write a complaint, a response to a motion, draft a memo, whatever the call of the question is, you'll be required to respond in the format requested. So if it asks for a memo, then you do a from to referencing, and then you follow the instructions in terms of what is required for the memo. If it's a response to a motion, then you do it just like you're doing a response to a motion. It's important that you follow the instructions on the practice test. So any questions just on the basic format? 7 essay questions, which you'll have 1 hour to answer each of those essay questions, and 2 Nevada practice test problems, and you'll have 1.5 hours for each of the practice tests. I believe it's 1.5 hours for each of the 2 practice test problems. I'm still working together with the executive director and the board whether we will increase that to 2 hours, but right now we have it scheduled, I believe, for 1.5 hours. So that's the format of the exam. Any questions on the format? we use the ILG software, the same software that we use for the in-person exam. You will receive the password via email prior to that session of the exam. You'll use that password, you log in, and then you will get the test on your screen. And once you start answering the questions on that exam, you'll be timed for the 3-hour session. From the moment you start, you'll have 3 hours to complete that. If you answer beyond the close of that, then whatever you typed after that, because we track keystrokes, whatever you type after that will be disregarded. If you lose your internet connection while you are taking that session of the exam, it won't matter, because once you download those questions and you're answering those questions, it's just like in the live exam. You're typing in to the program, and at the end of that session, you then are required to upload your answers for that particular session. And so this will proceed for each of the sections of the exam. Dean Gould, who's also a member of the Board of Bar Examiners and also the admissions director, has joined, so he can help me out on any of these procedural items. Hey, Dean, quick question. With the NPTs, are those 90 minutes or 2 hours?
2 hours.
Okay, so you'll have 2 hours to answer the NPT. After your exam answers have been uploaded to the ILG server, then ILG will compile for each of the examinees your entire booklet for these 9 questions, the 7 essay questions and the 2 NPT problems. And then those will be submitted to the bar examiners. Each of the questions has been drafted by a member of the Board of Bar Examiners. And the same thing with the MPT questions. Those have been drafted by us as well. Once we receive the uploaded answers, then we will grade the examiner who has written the exam question, and 1 or 2 graders that the examiner has worked with in the past will then score each of the answers to all 9 of the written answers. Because we're not using the MBE, each exam answer will be independently graded by the examiner and by a grader. So you'll have 2 independent eyes looking at each answer, and the results then, there'll be consultation if there's any variation by more than 2 points. It'll be graded on a 10-point scale. And to make sure that if there's any discrepancy, that the 2 people independently grading the question are looking for the same issues and the same answers to be addressed. For each of the 10 questions, the question itself has been written, and the grading rubric has been formulated, where a 7 out of the 10 will constitute minimal competence. In other words, that will be a 7 will be what we would consider a passing answer for that particular question. And again, you'll have 2 people grading this independently, and if one gave it a 5 and one gave it an 8, we don't just average the two. Then those two have to be reconciled. And the two, the examiner and the grader will then pull up that question, go through it together to make sure that the grading is consistent as to what the examiner was expecting when the examiner wrote her question. The NPT will count as 150%. So half again as much as one of the essay questions, and it will also be graded on a 10-point scale. At the end of the exam, if the examinee, if the test taker has received a 7 or higher on 7 of the 10 questions, then that will be a pass for the exam. Excuse me, 7 of the 9 questions. If the total score for an examinee is 70, that also will be a pass on the exam. The reason we use, again, the 2 independent graders is to make sure that we have the consistency within the exam, and this replicates, it's not exact, but it replicates the scaling process that is used with the MBE. The MBE in all of our exams, when we offer the MBE when we're in person, only counts for 30% of the grade. So it's not the significant portion of the bar exam, but we use those scores to scale the essay scores for each of the 9 essay questions. And without the MBE, we take the extra step and make sure that every paper is graded by 2 people separately. So let me stop there and see if anybody has any questions on that so far. Yes, Kylie.
So I think the Nevada Supreme Court thing said that NPTs are worth 15 points. So
they are.
So essentially, if I'm understanding the scoring, you can get a 70 or get 7 on 7 of the things, and that would be a pass, even though it's like 49 points, or
no. The essay question counts 150%. So in other words, you would have, with the 2 essay questions, that would be 30% of the grade. Excuse me, 2 of the MPTs would be 30% of the grade. And so if you got 100% on those 2, Kylie, you're starting with a 30, and you only need 40 more points to pass. Or let's say that you didn't do well on either of the MPTs, but you passed with a 7 of those essay questions. That also would be a pass.
Okay.
And we're using the 10-point scale, and we use 7, not because it's 70% of the points necessarily. 7 is what we use as the demarcation line of minimal competence on that particular question. It wouldn't necessarily give you a 70% in a law school exam. Our standard is different. Our standard is minimal competence, not ABCD or high honors, or pass. It's a different standard for a licensing exam. We convert pursuant to the Supreme Court formula, because the Supreme Court rule talks about a 75. And so we'll do a statistical conversion from our 7 or 70 as passing. We'll do that statistical conversion to fit into the Supreme Court's formula. But actually what happens is each of the 9 problems will be graded on a 10-point scale, 2 of which are 15 points each. Any other questions on that?
Thank you.
For all exams that where the total score is 68 to, I believe, excuse me, 68 to 69.9.
No, Rick, it's 59 to 69.9.
Okay, 59 to 60.9. All of those exams will be regraded. So those that have just are just below the passing mark, all those exam answers will be regraded by the bar examiner, not by the grader, but by the bar examiner. And then when we meet for our regrade process, those exams will be discussed by the board as a whole. And the question during that regrade meeting is, does this examinee, are these exam papers, do they meet the standard of minimal competence? So you'll have not only 2 people grading it during the normal grading process, but if you fall just below the mark, then these will be regraded again by the person that drafted that bar exam question. So any questions on that, on the regrade process? Again, with the MBE in Nevada, under our Supreme Court rule, is only 30% of the total exam, but we use it because you use the same questions from exam to exam. We use it to scale the exam scores to make sure we have consistency from exam question to exam question. And that's why we do the extra grading, where we have a separate separate set of eyes grading the paper, whereas in normal bar exam with the MBE, only one person grades each paper. Okay, Joan or Dean, anything you want to add to that?
Well, Rick, if you don't mind, because I have to go back into my formal hearing shortly, I just want to remind people of a couple things, and I would encourage you to please look on the admissions website. This is really important. Today is the cutoff date for you, if you haven't already done so, for a couple things. And it's serious. You have to do it if you haven't, please. If you are a computer taker, you have to sign the new and improved computer registration form, which you've been sent, but it's also on our website, and email it back to the admissions website by midnight tonight, 11:59 tonight. Because embedded in that is an honor code statement that we need you to sign, that you're the one taking it, that you're not relying on anyone else to help you. And we take that very seriously. And if you don't do that by the end of today, then your application is going to be withdrawn, and we really don't want to have to do that to anybody. There's been a couple of weeks now since the beginning of the year to do this. The second thing is, if you choose, and it's totally up to you, to go to a live, you want to go to July, because the odds are hopefully we'll be able to go back to a live administration, assuming COVID is not raging. We are allowing on a one-time basis only for you to defer that application to July without additional cost. But you have to make that election via email to us by the end of today as well. And if you are a handwriter, and I believe we've heard from all the handwriters, so hopefully this isn't an issue, who wants to change to computer so that you don't have to come into the state bar office, that deadline for that election is also today. So please, the most important one right now is the computer form. We had, as of yesterday, 62 applicants. They're not necessarily all Boyd people because we don't differentiate, but 62 people who have signed up for February who have not signed and sent back that form. So we sent out an email again today to those 62 people. If you are one of those, please, please, please get that back. And then the only other thing I want to tell you is on the 18th, which is Tuesday, I believe, you will all be, any computer taker will be receiving an email from ILG, which is our software people. It's the old, what we used to use ExamSoft, and I think that's probably what you're used to at Boyd. It's called ILG. You will be getting an email. It will tell you exactly how to register online with your computer so that everything's in place. You have until February 18th to do that. If you don't, then you will not be able to take the exam. And it's, again, you're given a month. Please do it. Don't wait until, the last second, because it requires you to not only go through a process, but to do a test with your computer to make sure everything's working well. So those are really the most important things I wanted to stress right now. So thank you, Rick. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions so far? Let me explain to you how the exam questions were prepared and how we work together with the graders to calibrate and grade each answer to the 7 essay questions and to the 2 NPT questions. At the regrade meeting, for instance, at our meeting in September, the examiners that have been assigned a topic to write for the exam present to the full board, there's 13 members of the board, their question and their fully briefed answer. During that session, then the other 13 of us, we then go through the question and the answer to make sure that there's no flaws in the question, the way it's written, to make sure that the answer, and usually the answers run a number of pages. We don't expect that from you for the bar exam, but these will be fully briefed answers to the question with case authority and statute authority. We make sure that there's no error in the question. We also make sure that the question is only focused on those areas of the law, on the subjects in the Supreme Court order that are considered the major topics. These would be all of the topics that are included in any of the bar review courses. We're not trying to test on some esoteric area of torts or contracts or criminal law that you'll never see in your practice. What we're looking at and we're testing on is minimal competence. And so we want to make sure that we're testing on these basic principles of these various subjects. And so over this 3-day period, we look at each question a couple of times to make sure that everything is, that the test is fair, that we're testing on mainstream issues, and that it's clear what the answer should be. We look at those questions. I'll look at all of these questions with 3 other members of the board in a couple of weeks' time. Go through it one more time to make sure that that it's a clear, fair, and that there's no mistakes in the actual typewritten question that will then be submitted to ILG and then to the students. That's how we prepare the question. We're not trying to trick you. We just want to make sure that we do our job and we're testing for minimal competence. We're not trying to see who has the absolute highest score on the bar exam. All you need is 7 out of 10 or 70 to pass the bar. Yes, I can. Karina.
Yeah. I just had a question kind of off of what Kylie had asked earlier. From my understanding of what you just said, you could get 7, say I got 7 on all 7 essays. So I got the minimum of getting 7 on 7 essays, but then I got, say, a 3 on the NPTs. I wouldn't reach the 70 points and I wouldn't reach the 59 to get relooked at, but I would still pass.
That's correct. I would be very disappointed if you only got a 3 on the 2 NPTs.
Yes, I just wanted to double check. So if you get 7 out of on 70% on 7 of the 9, you'll pass regardless if your score meets that 70 points.
Yeah, look at it a different way. If you pass 7, if you get a 7 on 7 questions, that's a pass. We don't look at it again. If you got a 70, let's say you didn't do very well on the 7 essay questions, but you did super well on the 2 NPTs. Let's say you got 100% of the points, you got 30 points there, then you could get a 5.5 on the other 7 questions and still pass the exam. So we look at it as either or.
Okay, thank you.
And as we're grading these, first of all, we've written the rubric with the minimal competence in mind. And as we're grading these, we each have our score sheets where we're making sure we're tracking the issues there. But the focus for each exam paper is does this exhibit minimal competence on this exam? It may be more than the 7 out of 10 points, or maybe less. It doesn't matter. We draw that line where we think it is minimal competence. And when we are first given the exam answers by ILG, then the 2 graders or the 3 graders, depending on what the examiner uses, each one of them, or each one of us, will independently grade 20 to 30 answers. The same 20 or 30 answers. We will then, once we've done this, we will then meet and go through each and every answer together to see if we're tracking each other. And so if I gave an 8 and Joan gave a 7 or a 6, we would want to know why, to make sure that we're being consistent with that particular question. And so what we do then is we make adjustments to the rubric so that when we go back to the grading process again, we're consistent amongst the graders. And again, with a remote exam like this, you'll have 2 independent grades for your question for each subject area. And if you had a 9 and a 6, then that question would be regraded by those 2 graders to make sure that they're consistent. And then we would take the average of those 2 scores for the score that's assigned for that examinee for that exam question. Nina.
My question has to do with what you were describing as making sure that the graders are consistent across grading. You were mentioning that, they make changes to the rubric as needed just to make sure that they're consistent. Is that something that's going to be taking place during the grading process, or has it already happened?
That will happen before we start the grading process.
Mm-hmm.
We'll each independently grade the same number of questions, 20 or 30 questions. And that's when we'll finalize the rubric. It doesn't make big changes, it's small adjustments to the rubric. During the exam, and it doesn't matter if it's a remote exam or an in-person exam, during the exam, after a certain number of questions have been graded, then the examiner and the graders get back together and look at the answers that they're getting. In this case, there will be the same answers, and to make sure that we're continually being consistent, so we're continually calibrating, but also it's possible that there would be one of the examinees or more than one of the examinees raises an issue that we think deserves credit. And so we'll give credit for that, and we'll go back and look at our other questions we've already graded and make adjustments where necessary. And we will then make the adjustment in the rubric that will give basically what it's doing is giving extra points. It's not taking points away, but it's giving extra points in there. And so it's a continual process to do this grading. Joan and I have graded before as a team together with my son. And so the three of us continually would work together to make sure that we're being consistent and that there's no deviations in how we're grading.
And one thing, if I can add something to the basic message here, I think, is that the drafting of the questions and the grading of the questions is a very different process than what happens in law school. Because in law school, one person, the professor, writes the whole exam and grades the whole exam. There's sometimes professors share exam questions or get advice, but it's usually one person, only one person looks at it. In this case, each bar examiner's question is vetted in a very intense scrutiny from how many of us are there? 15 other people or something like that.
13.
Okay, so it's like you have a whole nother dozen people looking at every single possible question multiple times before it's allowed to be a question. Very different from what happens. So you see a lot more variation in law school exams, I think, than you see in the quality of the bar exam questions. And I think, and the other part that I might not have been clear from what Rick was saying is that calibration process that starts we might be looking at 30 or 20 or whatever it is, initial exam answers that we're grading independently and then conferring to be able to see how well our grading matches up. Once we have organized and made that calibration between however many people are grading the same question, maybe 3 could be grading the same question, those initial early sort of sample questions are thrown back into the pot, and they all get a review from the people, from the sort of mature version of how we're going to grade this, right? So we don't say, oh, well, they're in a different situation because they happen to be the first one we tested ourselves on. They get thrown back into the pot, and everybody gets the final version of what the rubric is. So it's a much more professional process in some ways and collective and safeguarded. There are lots of guardrails in this process that are not typically available on law school exams.
The stakes are higher here than in a law school exam. And those first group of questions, they're then, when Joan says they're thrown back in the pool, they're thrown back in the pool. And so they'll come up randomly. Well, so you don't know, sometimes you recognize, but it comes back up randomly, and so it's graded another time.
Rick,
Yeah.
I have to leave, but can I just make one other comment? I don't know if you've covered this, but I just want people to understand, and maybe you can do that. We have a double coding process, which is separate from what you're talking about, but I just want to mention it. When you sign up, you're given an applicant number for the bar exam. Now, obviously, in live ones, you sit at a table with that number. With the remote exam, I think you're just granted a number. But before we send those out to the graders, we renumber them, and no one has that information other than the Supreme Court. And so that assures that as we grade them, now I'm talking from a bar examiner perspective, there's no way we know who you are, because there's no way someone could call an examiner that they happen to know and say, oh, when you get to applicant number 27, that's me, because it won't be 27 anymore. It's called a double blind. So I just want to point that out, because we go to great lengths to keep this very, very anonymous and secure, so that there's no opportunity for anyone who's grading to know who the people are. Obviously, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do not put any self-identifying information on your papers. And the only time this really comes out, sometimes on the practice tests, people, like if they say draft a memo, someone will inadvertently put their name, to senior partner from Alice Jones. Don't do that, because that tells us who you are. And we try to catch that in the admission side before it goes to the graders. But just do us a favor. Please do not put any self-identifying information on your test answers. And with that, unless someone has a specific question, Rick, I'm going to have to jump off because I have to go back into my hearing.
Okay, I'll talk to you after your hearing. Thanks, Dean.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Also, the regrade is assigned a new number. So if you're in that, I don't think anybody here is going to be in that band, but if you're in that band that's just below the pass number, then there's a new exam number that's assigned to those questions. So when we read them, then again, we can't go back to what we did before, because we have our score sheets from before, because we are assigned a new number. Questions? What we look for, you have a question? Valentina?
Actually, yes, I do. Actually, just an administrative question. Dean Gould mentioned that 62 people had not submitted their computer forms, and he did say that a reminder was sent. So that means that if we didn't receive the reminder, we are good, or should we just? Okay.
If you get the reminder, respond to the reminder. Okay.
If no reminder, we're good. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
And I'll cover some of the what I call mechanical questions in a second. So what do we look for in an answer? You want to, this is my mantra, and I've been doing this since 1991. So for 31 years, this is the mantra that I give to the students that I'm addressing here. It's called the 3B principle. And if you carry this over in your practice, it'll serve you well there. Be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. You don't need to write a hornbook or a law review article on each question. You need to focus in and identify what the issues are that are being examined. You'll need to tell us what the rule is. And the most important part of your answer is your analysis. Why is this result dictated with this rule and these facts? The analysis is the most important part of your answer. This is open book. So I can't imagine you can get the rule wrong. It's important that you know what the issue is. Otherwise, we have nowhere to start. But the analysis is the key. And so you have to explain why these facts with this rule dictate this result. Just follow IRAC, make it very clear so that the reader, whether it's a bar examiner or for your final exams or the judge, that they can see what you're trying to say. These exam answers, each one of these exam questions could be answered in 2 pages. Again, we're not looking for a law review article here. We're just looking at a solution to the problem. And so make sure that you are focused in on the issue, the analysis, and the conclusion. Okay? That's how, and you try to make it easy for the judge to read so that she can follow your argument. You don't try to make it complicated for her. You want to make it easy so that she rules in your favor. You want to make it easy for the examiner, the grader, to understand what you're trying to say. You just make it simple, short, and complete.
So unless there are other questions, I'll jump in also and say the frustrating thing for me, because I was every new bar exam that I open up and start to read, I want it to be great. And so what is frustrating is when I can tell that somebody isn't going to be great, is not going to be minimally competent. And there are there are basically 2 reasons why that is. One reason, which is incredibly frustrating and difficult, for in all sides, is somebody who seems to know what they're talking about, but they're talking about the wrong thing. And so it's almost as if they didn't slow down to think about what they're doing, and they're telling us something that they're competent in instead of what they've been asked about. And that happens more than you would think, because the bar exam is very much about careful, close reading. And in the essays, it's very much about close reading of the facts, because you already have the doctrinal knowledge, right? You already have your understanding of what the rules are. So what you're really learning that's new is all these facts that get thrown at you in the question. And so people, if you don't read it very carefully multiple times, you can kind of go off, you can not see something, you can misinterpret. Reading the questions really carefully is important. It sounds so silly and simple, but it's very hard to do when you're high pressured. It's hard to think well when you're under the stress that almost everybody taking a bar exam is under. So that's why you want to have methods to make sure that you know exactly what your method is, what your timing is. If you have an hour on a question, you know you're going to spend, and you do all your practice questions by spending at least 10 to 15 minutes organizing your answer before you write it. And then you're going to read, you know exactly how many times you're going to read the question. You're going to have those methods in place so that the habit, in a way, helps you to be more relaxed, to be able to do more thinking instead of more having the anxiety take you over. On the NPTs, if you look at the past ones, you'll see that there's a pattern. It would not be surprising for you to find statutes, Nevada statutes, and statutory reading is something that requires close, careful, slow reading. You're not just getting the gist of something. You're looking at all the words. In one of the NPTs that I graded, I forget which of the, I don't know, I've done enough that I can lose track of which is which. But there were some significant constitutional questions, and then there were very precise statutory reading parts of the question. And I had to read and feel bad about the fact that there were many candidates who lost points by not actually reading the statute, even when they had cut and pasted it into the answer, right? So they had taken the time to say, oh, here's the statute, and they had, for whatever reason, not very helpfully, cut and pasted, whole big chunks of this thing into their answer, but they hadn't read it. And the way I could tell is because part of the statute in that particular problem had a requirement about timing that was in the statute. And that was one of the issues that was raised by the problem in that performance test. And so you would have cut and pasted the whole provision without anyone actually having, or without these folks having actually read it, that said what the requirement was for when this free speech access had to be open in terms of the time of the day. And so that what should have been the easiest part of the question, which was, is it okay if we have this thing open from 9 to 11 in the morning? In the statute, it said it wasn't. A large number of people had the correct answer in the cut and paste, but they didn't ever read it. And so they gave us the answer that the timing is fine. That's about people not being able to slow down enough to really think about what they're doing. And so I think that's part of the reason you do so many practice tests, is to get used to time pressure and get used to the stress. So you're able to think when you're stressed for time, and make the bar examiners happier to be able to see that people aren't making that kind of mistake from not stopping and slowing down enough to think about really what they're doing. So the other thing I wanted to be sure that I remembered to say, since you are listening, even though there's no MBE on the test, I think the MBE questions are still really useful for studying, because they're a way for you to identify areas where you don't understand the rules. And you don't have to drill to do 10 and 18 minutes, right? Because you don't have to worry about being able to answer an MBE question in 1.8 minutes. That's not part of the test that you're going to take in February, which from my perspective is all to the good. But that doesn't mean forget about the MBE questions, because the most effective practice is when you are testing yourself over and over and over, so you see where your weaknesses are and you lean into your weaknesses. And those MBE questions give you a way to cover a lot of areas of law in a relatively quick place. They're all little mini essays, really. You just don't have to write them. So I would just suggest do a lot of MBE questions as part of your preparation, and also a lot of practice questions on the essays. And the more you're used to the stress of doing this practice, it's like, hitting a baseball or something. You can read about how to hit a baseball, but you aren't really going to be very good at it if you haven't taken a swing or not a lot of swings, maybe hundreds and hundreds of swings, the first time you're up in a big game and at bat. So the practice of the actual tests, not just reading the rules over and over, is what's most important for your time between now and the test.
And to reiterate, for every question, I would spend 15 minutes reading the question and writing my outline, making sure you understand exactly what the question is seeking, and making sure that you're clear on what the facts are. Outline your answer, because then if you're just following your outline, it's very easy to complete your answer. You won't forget anything and you won't get sidetracked. Sometimes when we're typing, we tend to go off on tangents, and this will help you from doing that. And quite frankly, I would say now, or maybe at the end of next week through the exam time, my advice on studying would be take as many practice essay questions as you can. And you don't need to write out a full answer, but train yourself to do the 15 minutes reading the question and outlining your answer. That'll be good training for you as you are studying for the exam, because let's face it, you can only look at the outlines for so many times before your eyes glaze over. So let me go through the questions, the technical questions that were submitted. And before I start that, does anybody have a question based on what Joan or I have said so far? Okay, may we use 2 computer monitors? Are we allowed to use an extended monitor? Can we use multiple monitors? Quite frankly, you only need 1 monitor, but if you want to, we don't have any prohibition on this. We're working off of the honor code here. This is open book. You have, you're required to certify that the work is your work. It's not somebody else's, that nobody helped you answer any of these questions. I can promise you, if somebody were to have somebody else help with the exam, it will eventually come out, and neither person, neither party will ever hold a professional license in any profession ever again. I don't even need to reiterate that. But in terms of you'll only need 1 monitor, but if you normally work with 2 monitors, it doesn't matter to us, because once you have the exam downloaded, that segment of the exam downloaded, you're blocked from using the internet. And then it's just like in the in-person exam, you go ahead and type out your answers. The second question, may we use hard copy scrap paper? Yes, you can have anything at your desk, any books, outlines, paper, whatever you want, you can have that at your desk to use. And I would encourage you to use the scrap paper so you can do your outlines of the answer. The exam is open book. This is my philosophy. Joan and I share the philosophy here. I think all bar exams should be open book. If you were to try to answer your client's questions without looking up the law, that would seem to me to be malpractice. But at least when we're doing our remote exam, it is open book. Does that give you an advantage? It gives you an advantage if you studied. If you didn't study and you're trying to look up the answer for the question, you won't have enough time to do it. You only have 1 hour. So open book helps those who have studied and have gone through the practice of writing your outlines and your answers while you're studying for the bar. This is an advantage because you can go ahead and make sure that you're putting down the correct statement of the law. If you haven't studied, you think, well, it's open book, I don't have to study. I hate to disabuse you of that, but that's not going to get you anywhere. You don't have enough time to do that. Are you going to have a live proctor? It will be recorded. So you'll have a camera on you'll have to have a camera on your computer. It'll be recorded during the process, just a video, not audio. And the video of the exam can only be accessed by the ILG personnel or the bar examiners or the bar examiners staff. We don't watch this live. We don't have somebody sitting on the monitor and watching. It's not like California or any state that's using the NCBE, the National Conference of Bar Examiners exam, and they want to make sure that they're watching your every move, and so they have this camera feed. Ours is different. It's open book, and you don't have to think that you can't turn around or stand up or do whatever. You can do whatever you want. You just can't have somebody else come in the room or in another room be providing answers to your questions. If we upload the video, can we use multiple camera devices? My suggestion, you only need one camera. If you have a problem, a technical problem, during the exam. We have a phone number to our staff in the bar examiner's office. You call that number and explain what your problem is. And we'll do everything we can, including bringing the ILG people on the line, who will be on the line to help you address your problem. Test everything out a number of times beforehand, so that the first time you're using the camera and your computer for the exam is the day of the exam. That's I would put that in the really bad idea column. I would make sure that everything is working fine and that you're comfortable with the process. If for some reason you have trouble logging into the question, again, we'll have a number to call. We'll make sure that you have that code so that you can log in. And the clock starts when you open up that segment. And it'll go for 3 hours if you are in that segment of the exam. If you continue to write after that time, we'll know that. We'll know per keystroke after the 3 hour period. And all of that will be disregarded. And if you did it more than a couple minutes, then that would raise a different question. And then we'd have to re-examine to see whether or not you were trying to take an unfair advantage of the other examinees. It's just visual footage only. The bar examiners, do you have any recommendation on previous virtual exams how to avoid issues with the camera? There, I would say, just make sure you test it out. You guys have been living on Zoom, unfortunately, it drives me crazy, but you've been living on Zoom now for a few semesters. So you're used to this. Just test out your camera. And if there's a problem, again, call that number and notify us immediately. If the internet goes out during the exam, it won't matter once you've downloaded it. If it goes out before you've downloaded it, then you call in, and so we make sure that we can get you back up and get that exam segment downloaded. Make sure that you're taking the exam in a place with stable internet, and that your computer that you're using is compatible with the internet. And don't do that just on the morning of the exam. Make sure that you've done this ahead of time. Is it okay if I talk to myself during the exam? And can we play music during the exam? I don't care what you do during the exam. Just don't look for outside help, and just get the answers right. Other than that, we don't care. Karina.
I completely blanked out what I was going to say. If it comes back, I'll ask.
Okay. What if I have to go to the bathroom during the exam? You can go to the bathroom during the exam. Once you open it, you have a certain time period, whether it's 2 hours or 3 hours, and that's all you have. We are relying on your honor and your certification that you're not talking to somebody else. I can just promise you, if more than one person would have to be involved in the cheating, and it will come out. And neither person will ever have any professional license ever again in any state in this country. It's just that simple. As a test taker requiring extra time with disability accommodations, all those that have special accommodations, they work together with Dean and with our staff, and they will outline specifically for you what, if it's double time or extra time or whatever, all that will be handled directly with our staff, whether you're doing the exam remote or in the state bar office. Karina.
Okay, I remembered. You said that we should practice to make sure our camera's working and all that stuff. So when we download the ILG software, we can take practice exams on it to see if it's working, or how do we know if we're practicing to make it work or to see if it works?
I believe Well, you'll know if your cameras work because you can test your camera and your computer and your internet connection. But I believe that the ILG will also give you the opportunity to log on to make sure that everything is working well in advance when you register. That's why it's good to register early rather than later.
Thank you.
Yeah, Siobhan.
Oh, you got my name. That's amazing. In situations where, let's say we have 2 or 3 essays that are supposed to be done back to back, and we know that the rules provide only 60 minutes for each essay, how do we make sure that we don't go over? How's that controlled so that we only spend the allotted 60 minutes on that essay and then move on to that next one?
Okay, it's no different than in person. You're given an hour. I lost you. Oh, there you are. You're given an hour per question, but let's say you want to use 75 minutes for 2 of the questions and then do the other question in 30 minutes. That's up to you. Okay. I don't care how long you take. And so you just monitor your own time. My advice to you is do my 15:45 for each of the questions, and to be pretty disciplined on that so you don't get off track. But if you took more time on one question, it just means you have less time on the next. Okay, Kylie.
I'm the person who asks a bunch of camera questions because in our registration form, it said like if there's any glitch that you won't grade our exam. So I'm just super paranoid. Does the camera require internet too? That's, I guess I'm confused. Like, will the camera function be on the internet? Because that's the only thing that would cut out, I presume. But.
Okay, I think I'm a couple of steps above being a troglodyte, but if you had internet problems, the camera is feeding into the internet. And if you gave notification that you had internet problems, but you're still going to answer the question, you would be covered anyway, because you'd already given us notification. But I would suggest you do call the admissions office and ask that specific question, because your question is fairly specific. Maybe you and Sydney can coordinate that, and we can get you a more specific from somebody who's a little more tech savvy than I am.
Okay, thank you.
Burke. And you know what, Kylie, the whole purpose of this thing is to reduce your anxiety. That's my job here. That's Joan's job, is to reduce your anxiety. That's why we explain what we're doing, so that this isn't some big mystery. I know this is high stress and none of that's going to change, but if you studied and you're disciplined in taking the questions, you'll be fine. And if there's some technical glitch, we have the ability to address those. We've been through this twice before. Nevada was the leader in doing remote exams. Burke.
And I also just want to say that anxiety stress thing is really important. You should understand that it won't work for you to create an elaborate method to try to figure out how to have somebody else take your exam, because you, as Rick said, those things come out and it destroys careers. But the bar examiners are very aware of the fact that nobody should be punished for technical glitches that are outside of their control. So the kinds of nightmare stories that have come up in many other jurisdictions are very much about the different decisions in those jurisdictions to require surveillance at a whole different level that Nevada has made a policy decision to not have. So I really don't think anybody should be feeling paranoid about a technical glitch screwing things up for them.
Thank you.
Nevada.
Thank you.
Burke.
Hey, I have 2 questions. Question number 1 is, I know you said we should be able to do the exam on just one monitor. Does the software allow you to see the essay question and see the area that you're typing at the same time?
I don't know, but call the admissions office on that. I'm saying I don't see any problem with using 2 monitors. I'm using 2 monitors now. When I teach on Zoom, I use 2 monitors. It's just easier for me. And so I don't see that that's going to be a problem. But Burke, if you and Sydney could reach out to Dean and his staff, they can answer that question specifically.
Got it. And then my second question is, we get 3 hours for the 3 essay questions. If the 3 hours is just for typing, right? Do you have like a minute after that to submit your question as long as you don't have additional keystrokes?
No. When you're finished, you're finished. And then the clock stops. But then when you're doing your uploading, that's not part of your 3 hours.
Got it.
It's just like in person. You know, you type everything in person on your computer, then it stops. Then it's easy there because everybody says hands up. And and so nobody's typing. And then that session on the platform closes out. So, and then everything is uploaded for that particular session. So that part, the way we do it in Nevada is it works the same as in the in-person exam. The remote in person is the same. Everything's downloaded to your computer. You're not worried about online then, you're just taking the exam, and then you upload it when you're, if you lost connection, when you get your connection back.
Thank you.
Nina.
So I have another technical question that was prompted by the new and improved computer registration form that we had to sign off on, saying that basically we have to keep a full head and torso view of ourselves the entire time. And I can see right now that, you know, there are several people with their cameras on where you can kind of just only see their head.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
All right. And this is just another technical question. So if you're able to time out however long you want to take on those 3 essays that we've kind of been talking about, is it accurate that you would basically download like all 3 essay questions at the same time and be able to look at them all at the same time? Oh, okay. All right.
That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same as in person, Nina.
Okay.
You download that segment of the exam. Mm-hmm. You'll have all of those questions. You can go through those, all 3 questions quickly, decide which order you want to answer, however you want to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Jake.
Yeah, my question is going back to the 2 computer monitors. So knowing that the honor code applies, I'm curious about whether, and this kind of goes to what Burke was asking about, whether we'll have access to 2 monitors. Would we be allowed to have a second device? Like I know for my bar prep, I've taken a lot of notes electronically. Could I have a second computer to access my notes if, you know, if the internet wasn't accessible, or, I mean, obviously I would be signing the honor code saying that I wouldn't be using outside help, but I'm just curious if that's the same thing or where the boundary lies with the device. Okay,
there's a very bright line, and the bright line is you can't access the internet to receive. I personally think you should be able to. That's how we practice, but then we would be testing people's research speed, and that's really not what we're testing here. So the bright line is no internet. If you use your iPad, sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll use my iPad with my slides. So I know the slide that I'm going in to next without interfering with what's going on my 2 screens. And I know a lot of my students will take notes on their iPad. And so, yes, you can use your iPad or your iPhone if that's where your notes are taken. You cannot use the internet.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I give an answer to a question that hasn't been asked exactly? In part because unfortunately I have another commitment I have to go to in a few minutes, and I also have no expertise on any of the technical questions. But in terms of studying, which is important. One of the things that some bar examiners saw on some of the previous open book exams was that candidates seemed to have wasted time trying to have super complete answers with exactly the right wording of things way beyond what was necessary, and that probably took them too much time. So I think one thing that you could think about, obviously everybody, the most important thing is for you to bring your best self to the exam days. And so you by this time know what that means in terms of studying. But for typos matter only if they make it look like you don't know what you're talking about because they're illegible. A few typos here and there don't matter to anybody, but it is true that I have seen, just in the couple of years I've been doing this, I've seen answers with 7 typos on a line, on one line, over and over and over, which is, I had no idea what I was trying to read. But what you can do for studying, I think, is something very similar for what you would do for a closed book exam. One method, I don't know, we can figure out later what Professor Lissy thinks of this, but one method that some people find helpful is to distill every subject that's going to be tested on the exam into a 1 page with tiny writing or big writing if you don't think you need to really know a lot. But if you've gotten everything you think you need to know about torts onto one side of a piece of paper, if you had a closed book exam, then the last thing you do is memorize all those pages. You don't have to memorize those pages in the same way here, but you have to have already done the distillation to understand how all of those different rules fit into each other, that you're able to make the flow chart or outline or whatever it is on your single page. So referring to a single page on a subject is something you could have time for on this exam. But flipping through Barbary to find the right category is not something that you're going to have time for. So I would just say do that distillation project in almost the same way you would have done if it was a closed book exam, and then you'll be ready to bring your understanding and have the confidence from the work that you've done to understand the concepts without having to worry about the goal. The great thing here is you don't have to worry about if there are, I don't know what they are, but if there are 11 hearsay exceptions, you can have a list of 11 hearsay exceptions and have that as a kind of a checklist without having to just have it all in your brain. And I think that's an advantage because it's getting you closer to the way that lawyers practice law.
Any other questions? Nina.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to follow up with Professor Howarth. Earlier you mentioned that there are 2 reasons someone might not be minimally competent. And you talked about how people, like someone might know what they're talking about, but they're talking about the wrong thing. What would be the second reason? Would it just be like
the second reason, and you're right, thanks for telling me, reminding me to get back to it. The second reason is that somebody, for whatever reason, and life happens and people have different situations, but somebody hasn't been able to put in enough time to really have good understanding of the breadth of all the categories of law that's necessary here. This is the time when you're going to know more law than any other time in your career. And if you don't, and that takes time because there's a lot of it. And so the 2 things that I see are people who are clearly at their worst from the stress of the exam, and then other people who weren't able for whatever reason. And I'm not going to make a judgment about it. I'll just say people who were not able to collect the amount of time and the focus that it takes to be able to succeed on this kind of a high stakes test.
Thank you for that.
If you've integrated taking a practice test as a central part of your studying, then I think that you will overcome a lot of the challenges that have been raised with some of your questions. I mean, that's the way to study, because now you're using the tools. You've already learned the tools. Now you're using the tools. And once you're comfortable with that, then I think it'll, and once you've seen that in practice, it's going to make everything easier. Okay, hang on. With respect to use of monitors in the ILG software, at least for the February exam, the ILG software limits your use of monitor to one monitor that was a duplicate display of the laptop screen, not an extended display. However, it did allow you to split the screen to see the answer on one half, the question on the other, toggle between the two. This is how the ILG software worked for the February 20 exam, but I don't know if it's the same this time around. February 21. I'm not sure either. And check back with a dean, and you can also, I'm sure there's a question and answer with the on the ILG site when you register with ILG, so you can make sure how that works. It doesn't make sense to me that you couldn't use two monitors, but the anyway, let's check and make sure, and we'll get the word from ILG. Any other questions? Okay. Just practice, practice, practice. And if you've taken enough practice tests and you've got the discipline of writing out an outline, a solid outline to your answer within that 15-minute period, and you've read the exam questions, especially the call of the question or the instructions on the practice test carefully, you'll be fine. I'd like to think that everybody who's passed the bar is a genius, but you know what? Almost all of us aren't. Okay. See if I have any other questions. Thanks, guys. Good luck. You'll be fine. Just stay loose and hang in there.